Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is my honor to welcome you at the 26th Annual Forum 2000 Conference. In 1997, President Václav Havel and the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Elie Wiesel brought to Prague for the first time a broad array of thinkers, politicians, activists, and religious leaders to contemplate the major challenges facing humankind at the threshold of the new millennium. Since then, Forum 2000 conferences are held every year, and every year they are special. This year, the Forum 2000 conference, however, is unique. It is unique because it is taking place in a time of war. A war against all of us, against freedom and democracy. A war that needs to be stopped and in which the aggressor must be defeated. At a time when the people of Ukraine are, for more than 6 months already, bravely defending their country, it is important that the free world remains firmly committed to supporting them. In this, we need to work together, not just in Brussels or Washington, but also in Asia, Africa, or Latin America. We must be united, determined, and patient. That is why this year's Forum 2000 conference features a special Forum for Ukraine, to emphasize our commitment, to search for ways to make our support even more effective, and to work towards a global democratic unity on this crucial and critical issue. One of the reasons for the brutal violation of international order have been Ukrainian aspirations to become a member of the European family of nations, of democratic nations. This conference will search for ways to help Ukraine fully join this European democratic community to which it rightly belongs and for which thousands of Ukrainian citizens have sacrificed their lives. We will also discuss how the free world can contribute to rapid reconstruction of Ukraine, and we will address the issue of responsibility for the war crimes against humanity committed by Russia. Those responsible for atrocities during this conflict must be brought to justice. Russia's attack on Ukraine shows that the global political and security landscape has changed profoundly. In these turbulent times, when we see the global resurgence of authoritarianism and democracy under attack, we need new ideas, principled leadership, and actions for an effective response. We need to search for ways how democratic alliances can be constructed and to brainstorm on how to make democracy stronger and more resilient. I would like to thank our partners without whom this gathering would not be possible. In particular, the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the National Endowment for Democracy, the International Visegrad Fund, and the program partner of the Forum for Ukraine, the European Values Center. On behalf of all who have worked hard to make this conference possible, allow me to welcome you at the Forum 2000 and the Forum for Ukraine. We look forward to inspiring and productive discussions. Thank you very much and welcome. Now, please let me welcome the first speaker of today, our keynote speaker, Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, Petr Fiala.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, dear guests, it's an honor for me to address the Forum 2000 conference. When I see the number 2000 all around me, I feel nostalgic. The year 2000 used to be a symbol of hope. We used to imagine our future world with a great deal of optimism. I will always associate this kind of thinking with our former President Václav Havel, the co-founder of this conference. When the year 2000 finally arrived, The West was indeed celebrating, but not for long. Soon the terrorists from Al-Qaeda stopped the party and brought an era of new threats. And we have still not recovered. This was a shock to the United States, but also to Europe, which had been enjoying a period of easygoing passivity. We were very optimistic about our future, but also grossly underestimating our security. Current Russian attack on Ukraine is in a similar turning point. There are two acts. First, the occupation of Crimea in 2014, and second, the full-scale war that began 6 months ago. We missed the opportunity to respond to the first act. We have tolerated the behavior of the Russian regime for many reasons. That is why the second act is much more difficult. Once again, brutal war was returned to Europe. Once again, we must confront an evil that threatens our civilization. The Czech Republic and the European Union are helping Ukraine to defend its sovereignty and integrity. We are managing the refugee crisis. We are planning the post-war reconstruction of critical infrastructure. The decision of the Russian dictator cannot be justified, and his war crimes will not escape punishment. No one who bombs hospitals will get away with it. Russia is taking us decades back to the language of the Cold War, to a world divided into spheres controlled by superpowers. We do not want such a world, especially when the spheres are not based on mutual trade, but on blackmail, abuse, and military force. I must stress that the war in Ukraine is not a regional problem. It affects absolutely everyone. You may argue that the fate of one European country cannot be a global priority. However, this is not just about Ukraine. This is about the whole system of international relations. If Ukraine, a country of 40 million people, is not safe, no one is safe. Think about Taiwan, Central Asia, Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russians have violated their own security guarantees since 1994. In exchange, Ukraine had to give up nuclear weapons which could be used today to deter these aggressors. What kind of signal is this? These security challenges do threaten the whole world. We must respond to them by the determined action of democratic countries. We must decide what kind of international order we want to build, a system where it makes sense to make agreements, or a system where aggressions is a norm. International rules have always been important, but they are especially important today. It is simply too dangerous to gamble with weapons of mass destruction. These are global challenges that each generation must resolve again and again. And I am glad about one thing, that Vladimir Putin's attack is refreshing the alliance of Western democracies. NATO is expanding and gaining momentum. The European Union is working well, agreeing on basic priorities and solutions easily. The next challenge is to maintain and deepen the global consensus on basic security issues, not only within the West, but also with other democracies. It is natural that each country has its own objectives, but we must all strive to live in a predictable environment. This is our common interests. That is why we want to build a better network of relationships, both formal and informal, that would protect those who are at risk. We must engage in a more intensive dialogue with our partners. We must prove that the liberal order brings concrete benefits. We must make clear that we are not afraid to stand up for our allies because our freedom depends on their freedom. As the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, I say that we are well aware of these challenges. That is why we are striving for more consistent support to democracies around the world and working to end of our dependence on rogue countries. It's a priority of our own foreign policy, and it's a priority for our presidency of the EU Council. Ladies and gentlemen, in one of my books, I wrote that European politics was facing the end of the age of passivity. But this has moved on. Today, we are no longer at the end. The age of passivity is over for good. Now is the time to make decisions. The world around us is changing, and we must act. The dreams of the year 2000 are long behind us. We have learned our lessons. We must work with our partners to enhance global security. We need new visions and new deadlines, and I am counting on you, the world's great thinkers, to help define them for the sake of the free world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. And now we would like to give the floor to a man that needs no introduction, the informal leader of the free world, a person who leads his country in this terrible conflict, President Vladimir Zelensky.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Prime Minister Fiala, dear participants of the forum. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Today is the 189th day of full-scale war of the Ukrainian people for its freedom. However, it's a war not only for our people. At different times, in different parts of the world, you see battles like that where the freedom is at stake and it's either emerges victorious or is defeated. For many countries and for a long time, we all recall 1968 when people were striving for freedom, where they were fighting for freedom, and where when a historical chance appeared in the very center of Europe. However, this chance was destroyed by the Russian tanks in Prague. The world failed to recognize the scale of this battle and what was being destroyed. It didn't see what the result of victory would have been. And Europe is still have to deal with the consequences of giving tyranny another 20 years. That the tyranny could sustain because freedom was not supported, because freedom wasn't given a chance to reveal itself to its fullest. What did it lead to? To deaths and sufferings, to waves of refugees and asylum seekers, to the countries in the east and center of Europe having to remain without freedom for several decades, not only without political, cultural, or individual freedoms. the economical freedoms and other expressions of normal social development were taken away from them. Only their kids and grandkids receive those opportunities and well-being that their fathers, who were young at the time of the Prague Spring, were young. But what is even more fearful is that the supporters of tyranny who lived at that time and witnessed the destruction of freedom with the tanks, all those who were frustrated with freedom, who didn't want to respect the rights of people to self-determination, it was then that this illusion that freedom can be suppressed by tanks was born, the illusion that you have to be just cruel enough and send enough tanks to make the democratic world scared. This illusion is at the heart of the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine that was started on February the 24th this year. But it is here on our land, and now we have another historical chance to destroy this illusion. Ukraine is a battlefield of the decisive fight for freedom, and I thank you for not leaving us alone, and I thank you for your support. I thank you for the unity that we preserve, and I would like to recognize a special role of the Czech Republic in the defense of freedom. It is important. Personal involvement of Prime Minister Fiala and other representatives of our state are very important. We have already achieved a lot. The tyranny now feels that free people can defend themselves and that the victory of freedom is very probable. We achieved this in different areas, from the front lines where the Ukrainian women and men physically defend freedom, to the political one where we achieved a lot for the entire Europe. Ukraine managed to get its candidacy status in the EU, and I thank the people of Czechia, your government and parliament, for your support on our European path. However, the battle isn't over. The front line is 2.5 thousand kilometers. Active hostilities are going on in the front line, 1,300 kilometers long. Can you imagine? It's as long as the road from Kiev to Prague, and Russia pulls everything it has to the front, and they have large stockpiles of weapons and munitions from Soviet times, and the invaders do not restrict themselves with any norms of any conventions or elementary humanity. They cruelly shell our cities using artillery. Every day and every night, our people die because of shelling, because of missile and air strikes. Mass-scale terror against people in the occupied territory is at the level the Europe hasn't seen since World War II. Russia is blaming Ukraine, Europe, and the world with the radiation catastrophe at Zaporizhzhia NPP. Just think about it. No other enemy of humanity ever tried to blackmail it with making a nuclear power plant a battlefield, part of a battlefield. Therefore, we have to do a lot together in order to win in this battle. Ukraine needs constant and adequate support with arms and ammunition. We also need financial support, and All leaders of the free world, heads of European structures know about this need of ours. In order to defeat the enemy, we need financial resilience, and the world equipped freedom in this battle against tyranny with the powerful sanctions against Russia. However, the potential of the terrorist state hasn't been fully destroyed, and therefore new sanction packages are needed for the radiation blackmail at Zaporizhia, NPP, Rosatom, and the nuclear industry have to suffer blocking sanctions. All potential aggressor states in the world should understand, because of the sanctions, that the price of a nuclear blackmail is too much for them to chew. It is time to block the banking system of Russia. It's nonsensical that the Russian banks can still work with the global financial system when the Russian state is trying to do all it can in order to damage the world as much as it can. We've also felt the acuteness of the food crisis and we reduce it. We have to do all we can in order to reduce or eliminate the acuteness of the energy crisis that Russia is using to derail our unity and our potential to defend. Therefore, we have to do what we can in order to make it impossible for Russia to make money selling its energy sources. On our behalf, we can offer EU countries its electricity. It's cheaper than elsewhere. Ukraine is now part of the European grid, and we can export much more electricity than we are doing today. And this may help fight price crisis, at least to its neighbors in the European Union, which will certainly make the price crisis in the entire Europe less acute. We have to understand that no country in Europe, neither Ukraine nor the Czech Republic, nor any other, shouldn't stand alone amidst this natural gas crisis. And finally, there should be a value-based reaction to all that the tyranny brought to Europe. And I do hope that you will support the idea of creating and supporting the activity of the special tribunal in order to punish the crime of aggression committed by those who unleashed the war against Ukraine. And naturally, we have to do all we can acting together in order to punish everyone who killed, tortured, and deported Ukrainians. And by the way, this will be an historic punishment to the system that sent tanks to you in 1968. And we have to make yet another value-based step, ethical one. Propaganda mongers from Russia can still operate in Europe, and the Russian TV is still accessible to European viewers. The TV, which is the world's biggest disinformer, who do they work against? What are they trying to destroy or discredit? The European democracy. And Europe needs to have full protection against the Russian propaganda. Not a single Russian propaganda monger should stay in the territory of EU. Not a single Russian state TV channel should be allowed to keep working in the territory of EU. And the territory of EU should be closed to those citizens of Russia that use Europe in order to take a break from the evil that condone with it at home, staying silent, visa restrictions will make Russian citizens understand that freedom is something they have to fight for. And closing the European visa space for Russian tourists will also protect countries from killers like in Salisbury or Verbietice. Ladies and gentlemen, I have no doubt that we will win in this battle for freedom. I have no doubt whatsoever that we are able to protect Europe against all crises that Russia keeps creating. And I have no doubt that we will recover and rebuild what's been destroyed by war. But in order to make this happen, we cannot have doubts in our ability to preserve our unity, the unity of Europeans and of the free world. I do believe that the Czech presidency at the Council of Europe will further strengthen our unity. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your support. Slava Ukraini. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to listen to you. We take your words seriously. We will discuss them. Many of the points that you made are part of the discussions at this conference. We wish you strength, good luck, and we are with your nation and with you in this difficult battle. And now please let me take the opportunity to welcome our next speaker, somebody who also does not need an introduction, one of the most influential thinkers of our time, Professor Franz Fukuyama. Francis Fukuyama.
Thank you very, very much for the invitation to speak to Forum 2000. It's an incredible honor to me to follow Prime Minister Fiala and, of course, the very heroic President Zelensky. And I also want to congratulate this country, the Czech Republic, for the contributions that it has made since well before the fall of communism, to freedom in the world. Václav Havel talked about the power of the powerless, and he demonstrated through his life and actions that that can defeat tanks in the end, that that can be a powerful idea in the world. And this country continues to uphold those principles today. So thank you very much for that. I only want to talk about 3 topics. I want to talk about why this war in Ukraine started. Second, I want to address the question of its global significance. And then I want to close by reflecting a little bit on the future and what may happen. So let me begin with the first issue. Why did Russia invade Ukraine? There has been an argument that began before the war that this war was driven essentially by the West, by the expansion of the NATO alliance into the territories that had been formerly dominated by the Soviet Union. And even today, you find people opposed to support for Ukraine on the grounds that it's basically the West's fault that this happened. I suspect very few people in this room believe this argument, but I think it's one that needs to be answered very, very clearly. So there are several problems with that view. The first is that it's not as if the leaders of NATO sitting in Washington or London or Paris said, how are we going to expand this alliance all the way up to the borders of the former USSR? Let's figure out how to do that. NATO expansion was driven by this country, by Poland, by the Baltic states, by all of the countries that had been part of the former Warsaw Pact, as well as by countries that were liberated after 1991 and the collapse of the former Soviet Union, because they knew what it was like to live under Soviet domination, and they believed that the moment the balance of power changed sufficiently, no guarantee of the Russians would be sufficient to protect their security. And it is they that were the primary drivers of that expansion. And we should be glad that NATO responded to that. The second has to do with listening to Russia itself, because, of course, the Russians didn't like NATO expansion. But I do not believe that that was their fundamental motive. President Putin wrote a long article that appeared about this time last year. He gave a long speech before the invasion on February 24th, in which he said very clearly that his major concern was actually recreating a great Russia that dominated as large an area as at least the former Soviet Union. And he denied very clearly that Ukraine was a separate country, that the Ukrainians had any agency in determining their own future because they were all part of one people. And ever since the war broke out, they have gotten more and more extreme in their assertions that Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian language, Ukrainian people that assert their right to be separate from Russia, they need to be actually destroyed and killed. So that is really the underlying issue for them. And finally, I would say that many of the Western opponents of aid to Ukraine argue from a so-called realist perspective. They say, well, we've looked at human history and we see that great powers require spheres of influence, and it's just not reasonable to think that a great power like Russia would settle for an opposing alliance all the way up to its borders. And, you know, it's a very odd argument, I think, certainly for an academic to make, because it basically doesn't take account of the changes in global norms that have happened over the past century. Yes, in the 19th century, you had colonial powers that were happy to rule over other people, but, you know, I would point out that very few countries live by that standard anymore and believe that they have a right to dominate involuntarily another country simply in order to have a buffer against some imaginary enemy. You've actually had an expansion of a belief in democratic sovereignty. Isn't that a surprise, that people don't want to be dominated in this fashion? And so I think the realist argument is actually extremely unreal. It doesn't take account of the world as it actually is. All right, the second issue has to do with global significance. As the Prime Minister pointed out, this is not just a matter between Ukraine and Russia. It is something that, in fact, affects all of us. Now, there has been a global democratic backsliding after the so-called third wave of democratization that began in the early 1970s. There was a massive expansion of democracies from maybe about 35 in the early 70s to, let's say, 100, 110, 115 by the early 2000s. But as Freedom House has pointed out, for each of the last 16 years, there has been backsliding. There's been backsliding all over the world, including in many countries that we had hoped would become more democratic, like Myanmar, like Tunisia, like Nicaragua, like any number of other places. And the qualitative changes have also been significant. Freedom House pointed out that two of the biggest backsliders in recent years were the world's two largest democracies, the United States and India, which have seen the rise of illiberal populism in their own societies. As an American, things have happened in my country that I, even maybe 10 years ago would not have believed possible, that people would vote for a demagogic, populist nationalist who is not willing to accept a democratic, peaceful democratic transfer of power, was willing to use violence to overturn a legitimate election. And that has obviously had a devastating effect on global democracy just in itself because of the example that the United States held to many countries for being a good, secure, and stable democracy. And I'm sorry to say that with the rise of populist nationalism in many other places, in Hungary, in many European countries, in Brazil, and so forth, this is a phenomenon that is still with us. It is still a threat in the United States, and it is not an accident that President Putin is very popular with this particular crowd. People like Salvini in Italy, Zemmour and Marine Le Pen in France, Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Donald Trump like Mr. Putin, and they like him because he is not a liberal. Putin himself said that liberalism is an obsolete doctrine. What they want is a world in which a strong man can cut through all of the constraints that a liberal society places on executive authority and just get things done. And that's been the argument that's been put forward very strongly by China and Russia in recent years. Unlike these squabbling, ineffective democracies, we can do things. And proving that wrong is incredibly important for the future of democracy elsewhere. The idea that democracy is not a fatal constraint, but it actually leads to stronger action because it's based on a strong social consensus. And so that's really the issue that is wrapped up in the war in Ukraine. Now, finally, the war itself. I think that as a political scientist, a lot of times we say, well, you know, the military use of force is not going to determine outcomes. That's all fundamentally politics. In this case, I'm afraid to say that's not true. Very much depends on what happens on the battlefield in Ukraine in the coming weeks and months, and for the following reason. As you are all aware, right now there's a big problem in Europe with sanctions because many people are facing a shortage of energy. It's going to be a cold winter in Europe, and the ability to maintain sanctions depends on political will, and that political will in turn depends on what the prospects for the conflict in Ukraine are. Over the summer, The Economist had a cover that said that this is going to be a long war, and that is very bad for Ukraine, because once Europeans are convinced that this is going to be a war that will continue year after year, like the frozen conflicts in the Donbass and in Georgia and in other places, then they're going to say, sorry, you know, we have to have a peace settlement, we cannot survive sanctions. On the other hand, if Ukraine is able to regain military momentum in the coming weeks and months, then I think it is much easier for Western politicians to say, we need to suffer, we're going to suffer for this winter, but it's not going to go on forever, because there is an outcome that will be much more favorable to Ukraine and to Western democracy. And that is why what's going on right now in the south of Ukraine is incredibly important to all of us. I would just say, I've been more optimistic than many of my colleagues about Ukraine's military prospects fighting Russia. I have never believed this conventional wisdom that Russia has endless resources and therefore it is inevitable that Ukraine is going to lose this war. I think the Russians could lose, or they could certainly lose in the south, and Ukraine can liberate Kherson and other territories that are critical to opening up its Black Sea coast and therefore opening up the country as a whole to international trade on which its economic survival depends. And so I think with the rest of you, I wish the best to all of those incredibly brave Ukrainians that are fighting on our behalf. I hope that they have a swift and clear victory and that happens soon. And if it does, I believe that we can get through this collectively as a worldwide democratic community. So, Slava Ukraini, Geroya Slava.
So, what an opening. Thank you very much, Prime Minister Fiala, President Zelensky, Professor Fukuyama. And now we are about to start the panel discussions. And for the first panel, which is aimed at looking beyond this conflict, looking at the time when Ukraine wins this war, what is the vision for success of Ukraine? And to discuss this, I would like to welcome the panel led by Minister of Foreign Affairs of Czech Republic, Mr. Jan Lipavský.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me invite guests and panelists, which are Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany. Please come to join us. Yes. Annalena Baerbock, please Dmytro Kuleba, Zbigniew Rau, Joseph Borrell sadly needs to travel back to sorry. Perfect. And Vopke, please join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me start with very little personal perspective, because we have just concluded informal meeting of Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the EU, and we had an informal lunch with Ministers of Associated Trial to the EU, which Ukraine and Dmytro was one of those guests. And these 2 days here in Prague, we had very open and frank debate on how to tackle with future progress. And it was demonstrated on the issue of visas, issuing touristic visas, and it's a complex matter. And we agree that we need to do action. We sometimes differ in our answers. But in the end of the day, we are ready to provide that answer and move on. And my perspective is that this is sometimes quite a heated debate. So then to switch into the conference mode and to discuss matter in broader scope demands a little bit of concentration. But thank you very much, all of you guests, for participating in this conference. This conference has one vision, and this vision is to bring Ukraine into the EU. We know it won't be easy. We know it won't happen overnight. It may take years, maybe, I don't know. It may take. We see the other enlargement processes being sometimes stuck in different kind of negotiations and processes. My personal thesis is that the political alignment is absolute key. Once we agree politically, we can find way, and the rest of that will be matter of processes. And yes, we have to agree on rule of law, we have to agree on many things, and those chapters definitely include that. But in the very beginning, there needs to be political alignment. And of course, we are living in an extraordinary times. You face onslaught, you face war, something which we don't want to imagine half a year ago. And yes, we have to ask ourselves, what can we do for Ukraine to survive this onslaught? What can we do for Europe to protect its architecture of security, which we built it? We built that security architecture with Soviet Union. The Helsinki Act, OCEC was founded with agreement of Soviet Union when we again stated that borders won't be changed by force. So thank you very much again for participation, and I'll start with questions. Dmytro, when will you win the war? And what do you need to do to support you?
We definitely will win the war.
Thank you.
It doesn't matter how much time it takes. And it is true that some emphasize the point that this is the war of attrition, it may last, it's too long, we cannot afford it. I think when we defend our lifestyle, our principles, our values, we have to fight as long as it is needed until we prevail. And when Putin, on the 24th of February, Putin did not attack only Ukraine. He attacked the West as a concept. And he attacked every household here in Europe, in North America, or in Asia, where countries share the same principles and values. The only difference is that while he attacked Ukraine with missiles and tanks, he attacked Europeans and others with energy crisis, with inflation, with propaganda. And the best Putin wants to achieve is to see doubts. Doubts in victory, doubts in our ability to defend what we stand for. Doubts are like erosion. They erode confidence, they erode commitment, and we have to come to a very simple conclusion. You know, there are discussions about how this war will end. I think, you know, there is a saying, perception becomes reality. If we set ourselves a goal that the end of this war will be the victory of Ukraine, and the victory of Ukraine means the restoration of its territorial integrity and the securing its right to decide its own future, as every democracy, democratic nation does, that perception will become a reality. That perception will identify our moves, our decisions, and it will become a reality. One thing that follows up directly from the conversation that we had on visas, because visas is just a big topic now, so let's take it as an example. On our way to victory, we will always be facing difficult choices. And we will always be tempted to take half measures, to strike balances, to take half measures against the aggressor. But the truth, the sad truth, is that the age of peace in Europe is over. And the age of half measures is over too. We have to be resolved, we have to be committed. Yes, we have to be tough, but this is the only way how you win wars. Especially a war against a country like Russia, led by President Putin. So if I have to face a situation when I have to choose between a half measure on, for example, visas and a real measure and no measure, I will prefer a no measure. I will prefer to take more time to discuss, more time to find a solution that will introduce a real tough measure that will deliver. This is the policy that can take us to victory, and that will take us to victory. I don't know the calendar, the schedule, but I'm absolutely confident, and I want to assure you that this is not only my personal confidence, it's how people of Ukraine feel. We have to win this war, and we will win it.
Thank you. And we are with you. And thank you for advice how to do decisions in the EU.
As an incoming member, you know.
Anna-Lena, what is the German vision for successful Ukraine? How would you define successful Ukraine?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation and good afternoon. But this is not a German vision, because what we are fighting for, what Ukraine is fighting for, is for the right every country has to define their own future by themselves. So it's not up to Germany, but I've been discussing with my friend Dimitri for a very long time now, because 6 months in a time of war seems like ages. And so I know what, not the vision, but what the future of Ukraine is, what Dimitri just said himself. And this is a free and peaceful Ukraine, like every other country in the world. And Ukraine has a right. And this is why we made very clear today at our informal council, but also with an input paper I gave together with my French colleague, making clear that we stand with Ukraine as long as they need us. And because we all agree on this, and this is not a sentence to applause for, because this is just a normal thing if you believe in the rule of law and in the freedom in the world, I would maybe give some controversy in the discussion, and I've listened to your speech, which I really valued, but I would disagree on one sentence you said, of saying we shouldn't talk about maybe this war should go on for a longer time. Because if I give the promise as a politician, and luckily in democracy, it could be the chance that people disagree with me and they say in 4 years, well, you didn't tell us the truth. But if I give the promise to people in Ukraine, we stand with you as long as you need us, then I want to deliver, no matter what my German voters think, but I want to deliver to the people of Ukraine. And this is why, for me, it's important to be always very frank and clear. And this means every measure I'm taking, I have to be clear that this holds on as long as Ukraine needs me. And this is why I think it's so important that we have to be frank. Yes, everybody wishes from us that tomorrow the war stops, but in case tomorrow it wouldn't stop, I will be also there in 2 years' time. And then sometimes it sounds a bit difficult on the EU level, and this is also where we disagree sometimes on measures the European Union is taking, because every sanction package we have to prepare that it holds also for the next maybe 2 years. If we don't need it 2 years long, well, this is great. But if we would need it, it has to hold as long as Ukraine needs us. And we are facing now a winter time where we will be challenged as democratic politicians. People will go on the street and say, we cannot pay our energy prices. And I will say, yes, I know, so we help you with social measures. But I don't want to say, okay, then we stop the sanctions against Russia. We will stand with Ukraine, and this means the sanction will stay also in wintertime, even if it gets really tough for politicians, and we have to find good solution all over Europe to balance the social effects, because this is the other part of this war. It's a hybrid war. The second strategy is to split our democracies, saying, okay, now the poor people are being left behind, and we have to give the answers. No, we stand in solidarity with everybody in our country as we stand with everybody in Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Minister Zbigniew, Poland has a crucial role in supporting Ukraine in this war, and I think it is very much admired for it. Also looking at the pace you are procuring for your army, I think there's it's a clear statement. How do you see security situation in Europe? But back to the integration of Ukraine into the EU. Is it possible to be working on it now, when the war is still raging? It is credible to be discussing reforms, and the meme says that we have to align the shape of banana and whatever. Is it really this time?
Well, certainly this is the time to talk and act for the future of Ukraine. And the future of Ukraine is going to be decided in 2 dimensions. First of all, it's absolutely crucial. Ukraine has to win the war. It's up to the Ukrainians to win this war, and they are doing a remarkable job, showing love for freedom, independence, sovereignty, and simply human dignity every day. And they are pursuing this path with enormous determination and heroism. But for them, in order to win this war as soon as possible, because I suppose this is something you are alluding to, it's necessary to help them as much as we can, militarily, politically, diplomatically, and economically. And quite frankly, the President Fiala has just said that the time of passivity, what was the time of being passive? Passivity in Europe is over. And I consider it as the motto of our thinking and acting today. The time of passivity is over, which means that we have to support all of us, everyone in the transatlantic community and among all the like-minded countries. We have to support Ukraine as much as we can and as quickly as we can. And what bothers me also in the European Union, that there are countries that are trying to do as little and as late as possible. So this is the time of saying farewell to being passive. This is one thing. And the other thing concerning the future of Ukraine, certainly Ukraine has done its best in order to enjoy the reputation of the most committed country to European values. It's not enough to talk about values, core principles on which our living together is based. They are fighting for this, and they are paying the highest price. So they are up to the challenge the war is posing to them. Now the question is whether we in the European Union are also up to this challenge. And what I mean here is the issue of the accession of Ukraine, and also of certainly of Moldova, Georgia, and so on. And we, the European Union, have committed many, many mistakes in the accession process of Western Balkans. It has lasted too long. We were not straightforward with them, with our partners in Western Balkans, and they are paying the price, and we are paying the price for that, because the countries from outside of our world of values are interfering there. And it's high time to draw the lesson from this experience. And what is necessary is a very transparent, very dynamic accession process for Ukraine. And if we manage to arrange it, not in the next decades, but in a couple of years, this is the most important issue, but something that we can do for the future of Ukraine. And if these two things are going to be achieved, I'm absolutely sure about the future of this brave country, because we will gain a very important friend and partner within the EU borders, who now they are freedom fighters, they are freedom protectors, because they are protecting us, and in the future they are going for decades to come. They are going to be freedom promoters. There is no doubt about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wopke, Netherlands, typically, when the debates about enlargement in the EU very often is the critical voice of that. And we can understand that. And especially with Ukraine, there's a tragic history connected to that. How is the current situation changing your view?
You are already
how to convince generally the typical Western Europe, which is, and I understand that, maybe a little bit skeptical and want to adhere to certain nice, small, strong union. How to talk to you, and what should Ukraine prove to, for example, to Netherlands that it's ready and fit and to be member of the EU?
Well, thank you very much, Jan, and thank you very much for organizing this.
Yeah.
And in my view, answering the set of questions that you posed, it starts with acknowledging that we, all of us, have been hit by an earthquake in February of this year. You never know exactly what historians will write when we are a couple of years down the line, but one thing is for sure, there is a clear schism and there will be a clear before and after. And many might say that actually it was a wake-up call in slow motion, and that there were many signs along the road that actually explained to us and that we should have seen that geopolitics never died, that imperialism was always there, but there is clearly a before and an after. And you can actually also see that by the response of the European Union and of friends from across the globe. Because if you see what the European Union and other friends of Ukraine have done in terms of supplying weapons, in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of harboring refugees, even the countries that might have been skeptic on harboring refugees in general. If you look at the amount of sanctions that the European Union and others have come up with, if you look at that whole set of measures that we have been taken, I think that is without any precedent. And it is certainly something many in this room and across the globe wouldn't have expected from the European Union, including Vladimir Putin. I think there is a tremendous miscalculation in the Kremlin about the fighting spirit of Ukraine, the ability and the will to defend itself, but also in the whole Western response to it, which has been much more accurate, much more coherent, and much more united than many, including the Kremlin, would have expected. And my view is that we do need to continue to help out Ukraine as long as it takes on each and every one of these dimensions. And of course, some of them are linked to the European Union, such as sanctions. Others, like weapon supplies, are much more linked to individual countries. But it is with reason that I think all the countries here around the table and many others have done more than their fair share because they see and they acknowledge what is at stake. And to me, that has also been at the heart of the decision of all European countries to say that even though it is without precedent, even though we have looked at the accession process differently in the past, geopolitics is back, and geopolitics should be taken into account when talking about enlargement. And it is that very acknowledgement that has enabled us to make this decision, again, without precedent, and with all sorts of difficulties potentially on the road, to allow Ukraine this status. I think it is a wise decision, and it is much more than simple symbolism. It acknowledges the geopolitical situation and the danger that we face on our continent. It pays tribute to the situation in which Ukraine currently is, and it shows that we will see this through, that there is a joint future for the European Union and Ukraine, and we will do whatever is necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes, so I propose that we do one quick round. Dmitro, Ukraine was granted the candidate status with several conditions. How do you see the fulfillment of these conditions?
Listen, our full life is about conditions. We got used to it. Yes, we don't. The only thing that we want is to be treated fairly in the assessment of the implementation of conditions. We have done out of 7. The polite word for conditions is recommendations. So out of 7 recommendations put forward by the European Commission in connection to granting the candidacy status to Ukraine, we have already implemented 1 in full. We appointed the anti-corruption prosecutor. We have launched the selection procedure for the head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. Believe me, we are very much committed. We know what is at stake, and we are very committed to implementing these recommendations and to asking the next question, not what is next, but when is next. And I think we all deserve a little bit of optimism here, because traditionally, when someone speaks about Ukraine's European integration, the natural way is to always add a second sentence. Well, it may take years, it may take a lot of time. And what if it doesn't? 3 months ago, no one believed Ukraine would be a candidate country. We were hearing the same story. Well, it will take time, many years, until we reach there. And by the way, I would like to commend, of course, all countries who supported this decision, but in particular Germany and the Netherlands who supported the candidacy. And it was a milestone decision for them. So now we are candidates. We are moving, we are implementing the recommendations. And if we are ready to act fast, the European Union has to act fast too. And as you said, maybe it will not happen in a night, the EU membership, but it may happen in 2 nights, not in years. So that's our plan.
Couple of nights.
Whatever you mean under night. Yes.
How do you see, Anna-Lena, the discussion in the EU about the beginning of the accession process? Is it a formality? Is it a big thing?
Well, I think it's a huge thing. The whole step that Ukraine will become, and this is not a time question, this is Ukraine will become an EU member. Full stop. And I think we have to make clear, because we are in a time of war, and we also on this panel, I mean, we agree on 99% here on the panel. And we have, like, maybe this is human, but this is probably politics, always find then this 1% where we disagree. And this is life. I mean, in every family we disagree. Nobody is like 100% agreeing on anything, even what you want to have for dinner in a family. But in this time, I think it's very important to see where we agree. And this is really tremendous, not only for Ukraine, but for the European Union. I mean, like 2 years ago, there were probably half of the room would have said, so what is the reason for joining even the EU? I mean, this is a project, I mean, for peace, but peace is given anyhow. And now we see, no, peace doesn't fall from the sky, unfortunately not. We have to defend it and we have to fight for it. And we see how important values are. And we also see, and we have learned that again in Germany, that interests and values are now different stories. They are one side of the same coin. They are 2 different sides of one coin. This all belongs to each other. I think this is really the moment we have to also acknowledge what we have achieved, even in times of war. We have achieved what Putin feared the most, unity in the European Union. We have achieved that Ukraine will become an EU member. A couple of years ago, the discussion was, no, Ukraine cannot become a member of the European Union. Finland and Sweden will join NATO, even though the countries didn't want to join NATO. Now they are joining NATO. And to also tell this story, even though it's hard and even though it's totally different in Ukraine, but to say, if you're breaching with fundamental rights, with international law, so heavily as Russia did, then you get the opposition from most part of the world, and not only from the EU, not only from G7, not only from NATO, but from 141 states. And I think it's also not a story from the West against Russia. No, this is a story from those who believe in international law, who believe in human rights, who believe in liberty, and most of them also in democracy. And it will take as long as it needs, but in the end we will win, and I think this is where we have to focus on these times, and not where we disagree, but where we agree and fight for it all together.
Bobke, your country is also renowned with justice and with the court. And in Ukraine now the huge injustice is taking place. So how that plays, how that fits into the overall picture of bringing Ukraine into the Europe, into the EU?
You know, I think one thing is very clear also from this panel is that we are all committed to make sure that Ukraine wins this war. That is first and foremost, that is top of mind. However, we do know that the most horrific things have been taking place and are still taking place. And Annalena and I were there a couple of months ago. We talked to people in some of the villages that were hit the most, and the stories are truly breathtaking. If you think about the rape of women, the rape sometimes of men, children's toys to which booby traps are being attached, and what that does to the civilian population, to me one thing is crystal clear. We cannot let that happen, and we will not let that happen. And we do know it always takes years to make sure that justice will be done, that typically you can only touch a fraction of all the crimes that have been committed. But let's make sure as an international community and as a European Union, and with everyone who believes in the universality of human rights and everyone who wants to stand up against these type of crimes, that we bring the people who did this at a level, at a military level, but also at a political level, that we bring them to justice. We owe that to the victims, and we owe that to future generations.
Last but not least, question to you, Zbigniew. How would you define the success of Ukraine in this war?
So far or in the future? The success of Ukraine?
Success of Ukraine in this war.
Well, success of Ukraine in this war is more than clear. First of all, Ukraine has to regain occupied territories. Then it has caused Russia to become so weak that it would never think about any kind of continuation of its imperial policy, which means that each and every neighbor of Russia will finally feel free from the danger of being invaded. And the third point, even more important, we know from Russian history very well that when Russia faces a military defeat, this kind of experience starts a profound discourse, inner discourse within Russia. This took place after the Russian-Japanese War. This took place after the failure of the Russian invasion in Afghanistan. First, it was the revolution of 1905, which changed Russia considerably. And after the defeat, after the failure in Afghanistan, perestroika took place. So Russia, I still naively, perhaps romantically believe that Russia still has a chance to go back to its splendid but very narrow tradition of the decabrists, of Andrei Sakharov, and so on. And if the Ukrainian victory can lead to that, we will all win this war. The free world will win this war. Thank you.
So, thank you very much to all of you. Time is up. Thank you very much for taking part in this conference, and see you on the other occasions. Thank you, Anala.
It was over-optimistic on my part.
Perception becomes reality, as I said.
Thank you.
Yeah. Please, I'd like to ask distinguished panelists to join me here on the stage. Hi. Veronica, nice to meet you.
Hello. Hi. Nice to see you. Nice to see you again.
Yep. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome here such a distinguished group of panelists for our next panel. My name is Veronika Kukinova-Smigolova. I am a deputy minister at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I hope I'll be able to lead those 5 ministers in this discussion. Our panel is called Secure Wider Europe, Vision for Success. And of course, it's all connected to Russian invasion of Ukraine, which clearly demonstrated the fact that Russia is an absolutely unreliable neighbor for Europe. Russia aims to create instability and insecurity and thrives on chaos and disinformation. So it's a key task for us, EU and NATO members, not only to help Ukraine to win the war, but also to strengthen and stabilize the wider neighborhood. Prosperous and stable countries around us don't necessarily have to become EU members or NATO members, but they should see the advantage of sharing European values and norms of behavior. Some of those countries, Ukraine at the first place, but also Moldova, were granted candidate status of the EU, but this isn't an immediate option for everybody. In this panel, we will examine the situation, priorities, and instruments available for us. And I would like to start and jump immediately into the questions. I would like to start with Minister Landsbergis, who is from a country not in a broader neighborhood of Russia, but in a direct neighborhood of both Russia and Belarus. So I would like to ask him which countries in the neighborhood, in the broader neighborhood, are most vulnerable, to which countries we should concentrate most, and what are the instruments available to us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, first of all, for allowing to speak in this distinguished panel. Also, very interesting subject that we've spent almost 1.5 days discussing among the ministers, most of the questions, and also the question that you've mentioned. Probably I would start that until the 24th of February, we've seen Eastern Partnership still as one unit. Maybe apart from Belarus, which was on a different plane, but nonetheless, the unit was clear. And we approach it as a unit, we deal with it as a unit, even though there are slight differences. The 24th changed some things, and then candidate status for 2 countries out of the Eastern Partnership changed a lot of things. So basically now we have, I would say, even 4 groups within the Eastern Partnership, and I think that the approach needs to be different to each and every group. Well, the first group, Ukraine and Moldova, is very clear. We need to help and assist any way we can for the countries to progress further down their candidate road. And it is very clear. You know, I come from the country that was helped down our road as a candidate country. Our Nordic friends, firstly, were always there when we needed assistance and guidance, legal advice or whatever. That was quite difficult for a country that was re-establishing itself after almost 60 years of occupation. So I think that this example could be used in Ukraine and Moldova. I will put aside everything that has to do with the war in Ukraine. Then there's a question of Georgia. And I think that We all want to see Georgia also receiving a candidate status. It's understandable, but I think it's fair to say that there are things, certain homeworks that need to happen in Tbilisi. But we cannot lose sight, we cannot stay idle and wait until they implement these things, because it's also, there are geopolitical tensions with each country, and if we're not active enough, then basically the geopolitical tensions could drag the country the other way. Then the other group is Armenia and Azerbaijan. And I think there are many things that we can do. There are many things that Europe has done already. But honestly, I very much value the effort by the Council President, Charles Michel, when it comes to the peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think Europe has a role to play in the region. As a partner, as a friend in some cases, as a partner that is trusted by both sides, and we can definitely do more. Now, the most difficult question out of the Eastern Partnership is obviously the Belarus. After 2020, the stolen election, most of the opposition is either in jail or is out of the country. It's very difficult to operate within Belarus. Diplomatic activities are extremely limited because there are very few ambassadors left there, very few diplomats left. There are basically no NGOs left. So the country is fully isolated, almost fully isolated. It's extremely controlled by Russia and participant in war. So it's, one might say that it's a lost case. But on the other hand, I would like us not to forget the images of 2020 August. Hundreds of thousands of people waving white and red flags in the streets of Minsk and other cities. It's this incredible sight. And those people are still there. They're not in jail, and they have a sense of freedom, the quest for democracy in their heart and mind. So I think that we have to admit that Belarus can never be a lost case. We need to fight alongside the opposition who's still doing their job while staying in our countries, to help them reach out to those people who protested Lukashenko's regime, who are not supporting the war, and help them rise once more and rise up to the challenge to winning their country back from the regime that has it captured.
Thank you very much for a great summary, and I follow with a question to Minister Alvarez, directly connected to the one you just answered. There are other countries in our neighborhood, countries that do not feel threatened directly by Russia, but rather more by other issues like food insecurity, fertilizer shortage, and even don't see Russia necessarily as a main culprit in what's happening in this field. What would you suggest we do with those countries to keep them firmly on our side?
Definitely. That's a very big challenge that we are all facing. There are many countries around the world that they feel that they must not take sides because they consider that the blame is a little bit between two. They don't perceive the Russian threat as we do, or because they cannot afford to be aligned, because they are dependent on the Russian grain or on the Russian cooperation. So we really have to engage with them. First of all, to make a counter-narrative and to explain the truth of what's going on. Many countries still believe that our sanctions have an impact on the grain or on foodstuff, when it is very clearly stated that there is an exception for grain and for anything related to food in our sanction. Many countries continue to see this as just a territorial issue between Ukraine and Russia in which we are taking side. We must explain them that what's at stake here is either we go back to the past, to the sphere of influence, to the fences, the walls, very dark times for the world, or we go towards the future. The future is what European Union model is proposing: diversity, democracy, rule of law. And for all those countries that think that the price is too high to pay to speak up and to raise their voices, we must be there also to provide them with help. We must understand that for countries in the Maghreb, in the Sahel, in many parts of Asia, in many parts of Latin America, if we are not there to engage politically and to back them financially and concerning food security, they have no choice to do. So for me, the right mixture in order to tackle this very important issue is political dialogue and at the same time full financial support, especially concerning food security. There is one region that Spain knows very well, Latin America. In our next EU presidency, in 10 months from now, we want to re-engage them with Europe. It's probably the most Euro-compatible region in the world, but if we turn our back to them, they will turn their back to us in this specific issue.
Thank you very much. There is another aspect I would like to ask with Minister Orescu. And this concerns the importance of transatlantic unity. Do you think that it is possible for EU and US to cooperate not only in security area, but let's say to divide labor in dealing with the neighborhoods to help them understand what's going on?
Well, I think it is very much possible, and I think one of the main effects of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which was of course not wanted by President Putin, was more unity. Well, he thought that he could speculate our divides within the European Union, which was not the case. To the contrary, I think we showed much more unity than expected, and this is a good thing. And on the other hand, I think he also thought that he could speculate the divide between the two shores of the Atlantic, and it was not the case. To the contrary, the result was that we showed much more transatlantic unity, and the level of coordination, the level of contacts, the fact that we managed to adopt sanctions almost at the same time, at the same pace, of course taking into account the specificities of each of the parties of the transatlantic link. This shows that we were able to act together in a very coordinated manner and in a very efficient manner. And this coordination is going on as we speak. And of course, we can also deal together with the neighborhood, because the attack of Russia against Ukraine was not just about Ukraine. It was an attack against the regional security. It was an attack against European security. It was an attack against transatlantic security. It was an attack against the fundamental parameters of the Euro-Atlantic security architecture. The fact that during the NATO summit in Madrid we were able to take so many important decisions, the new strategic concept, taking into account the reality changes on the ground. The fact that we managed to adopt very bold measures consolidating the deterrence and defense posture on the eastern flank. This is the result of the transatlantic coordination and cooperation. So yes, the answer is to the positive. I think we can cooperate together, and I think we are quite effective when we work together with the United States.
Thank you very much. My next question would be to Minister Stewart, and I would like to explore the idea of Russian defeat. Is a defeat of Russia a precondition for securing wider Europe? How would that defeat look like? Is it necessarily a military defeat, or are there other ways we could arrange the situation around our borders without Russian defeat militarily? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. There can be absolutely no doubt that Russia must be defeated, and the war aims of the sovereign, independent, democratic nation of Ukraine must be fulfilled. Without that, look back at recent history, look back at longer history. How will we have peace in our neighborhood, in our part of the world? It's not possible. And Prime Minister Fiala in the earlier session set out quite rightly the fact that there's got to be the end to passivity. We've got to, this assumption, a Whiggish assumption that the world will just keep getting better and everyone we engage with will just move towards democratic norms is proving not to be the case. And so we've got to end passivity. And as President Zelensky said, Ukraine is the battlefield for freedom. It's not just the battlefield for European security, it's not just the battlefield for Ukraine, it's the battlefield for freedom. And you know, Francis Fukuyama, I completely agree with him. He said it is. Normally you always say it needs politics to bring a solution to this. Without politics we can't bring it to an end. In this case, and I entirely agree with him, it's war that is going to provide the solution there, and it is Russian defeat which is necessary and is going to happen. Picking up on Minister Kuleba's remarks, he said no time for half measures. We've got to get the military equipment, the training, and the finance all in place. We've got to make sure that ministers such as myself and my colleagues are not sitting here opining while there is a failure to get every piece of vital armament, multiple launch rocket systems and the like, in the hands of the Ukrainians now, as well as mobilizing the finances which are required, because they're running a very serious budget deficit, and the gap between the money which they require and the money which is coming in is large, and that's even if you take the promises as being concrete. And of course we've also seen rather slow dispensation of some of the funds that have been promised. Too big-headed to hold this. So it's so important that we do that. So we must win. And just a couple of remarks, if I may, just on the sort of broader question of securing wider Europe. There would be three key points I would pick up there. One would be strengthening our collective security through NATO. Our commitment in the UK is unwavering to NATO. It's the cornerstone of Euro-Atlantic security and is the foundation of our collective defence. So we've got to make sure that that stays in place. And as has been referred to already, the NATO Madrid summit was a significant step forward, a historic moment with a new strategic concept, and of course the invitation to Sweden and Finland to join the alliance as well. We've got to promote stability in the eastern neighbourhood and the Western Balkans, so important that we get momentum there. We need to end passivity there as well, as was suggested by Gabrielis. So that's a really important area. And the third kind of key pillar I'd look at is building our economic and security partnerships. We're working closely with allies to strengthen cooperation on technology, trade and security, drawing on our shared values to help promote democracy, prosperity and freedom, not just in Europe, but across the world. And I'll give an example. In 2019, the UK signed a strategic partnership and cooperation agreement with Georgia to ensure the continuation of free trade there. And we signed an equivalent agreement with Moldova. We all need to do more, and we need to do it now.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In the context of what you just said, I want to ask Minister Haavisto Finland decided to join NATO. We are very happy to welcome you. It's a great news. Do you think that NATO enlargement should continue? That the solution to the problems would be also in NATO enlargement, through NATO enlargement, and should Ukraine eventually join if it wishes to join?
Thank you, Veronica. An excellent question. But let me start with a little bit wider perspective. I was one day thinking that since our government has been running now a little bit more than 3 years, what are the issues that we have done before applying a NATO membership? And actually, we were bringing our children back from Al-Hol camp from Syria. We were bringing our soldiers from Afghanistan. We were evacuating people due to the COVID crisis. We made Africa strategy, we made China strategy, and actually I just want to us to remind ourselves that we are speaking about the global security, and if there is no global security, there is no security even in Europe. I'm saying this because of the fact that we were hosting in Finland early June 20 African ministers, asking them why you are not on board on the Ukraine issue, why you don't condemn this violation of the UN Charter and all the key security principles. And actually even putting a little bit more pressure to people that, well, when you had a fight against apartheid and when you had a fight against the colonialism, we were with you. Why you are not with us in these special circumstances? And you get a lot of different answers from these ministers who basically it's a linkage to Russia, economic linkages to China, security linkages, certain support, and that just showed us how much more we have to do as Europe also when looking at this wider security. And then we have the new security topics like a climate issue and so forth, which we have to work systematically also globally with now COP27 is coming to Egypt and so forth. All these moments are extremely important for our own security as well. And then I'm coming to NATO and NATO enlargement. We Finns are very security-oriented people. You know, when we see a problem with the security, we immediately start to react. And so far, we have been relying on a system of the national defense and good cooperation with NATO and keeping this kind of in our pocket, probably self-created, what we call the NATO option. We were thinking that if security circumstances change in our neighborhood, we have always the possibility of applying NATO membership. And what could have a bigger change in the security environment than a Russian attack against the Ukraine war in Europe? So Finns actually moved extremely rapidly to a new position, and I'm so sorry to say to the Swedes, but we probably took the Swedes with us also in this new analysis. I got a little bit the feeling that if Finns are so concerned, Swedes should also be concerned about the current situation. Well, but I think it's a very good story. We are joining NATO, and then what would be the future of NATO enlargement? I don't want to speculate too much on which countries will be finally full members, but I think it's very important that that same option that we had actually to work very closely with NATO when we were not members, but having common exercises, take part to those issues that fit to your national security planning and so forth, you could cooperate with NATO. And then my final thing is we are now in the EU or have been just in an EU meeting. The very close cooperation with the EU and NATO is extremely important. And I think EU has done a lot now for Ukraine, for the solidarity to be on the front line on this issue. And I'm so proud of this EU unity on Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for some more questions for another round. The topic that is very interesting is it's China and what China is doing in our region and how it is connected, how strongly it is connected to Russia. And basically, I would like to ask Minister Landsbergis if EU or Europe is able to offer competitive solution in the neighborhood. You have had a lot of experience with China and Chinese wrath, so maybe you thought also about those issues.
Thank you. Probably I won't be able to avoid now this question till the end of my term, and maybe even a bit longer. You know, I've tried to imagine or remember at least the time, let's say 5 years ago, and what was our approach, well, European or even global approach to China. Did we check for investments? Did we see as in any case threatening whenever they, you know, build bridges, railways, ports, 5G equipment or something like that? I would say probably not so much. But during the last 5 years, and I probably would say that it started with sanctioning Australia and COVID, that actually we started understanding what it is China these days. That it can be aggressive, it can be persistent, it will use whatever instrument it has in its power in order to change the course of other countries. You know, and they can be near, and then as the Lithuanian case showed, they can be further away. For them it doesn't matter. And I think that the last point in this on this path was Russian invasion in Ukraine. And now we actually live in different reality. I see way much more suspicion among the European countries, among the Western countries, or even what is called usually the global alliance when it comes to China, when it comes to China's assertiveness, military, economic. And I think a lot of us are starting to wake up to this new reality, that it's not just Russia attacking Ukraine. This is actually something, it possibly way bigger as being challenged. This is global security architecture. And if it falls down, if it were to fall down in Ukraine, then all of the other actors that depend on it would be in danger. And this is, I would say that it is a very timely awakening. The only problem is that it is being paid for with Ukrainian blood. But we are awakening. And I think that now when we awaken, this global alliance, when it awakens, is to make sure that the global security architecture is defended, strengthened, and ensure that it will last for at least as much as it has lasted. That's the first point. The second point is, you know, there was I would say, very important debate happening in European Union, and it was, you know, I would nickname it strategic autonomy. There were different approaches to it. There were different opinions about it, but I think it was useful and needed. Lithuania supported part of it, more of an economic part of it, not maybe the security part. We do not believe, and we have not believed that NATO has an alternative in any case, and I think that this war in Ukraine shows it. But it is very important now, if we want to be taken seriously when it comes to our future debate about strategic autonomy, about European role as a geopolitical actor, that we need to be very serious about what we do in Ukraine, and going back to the first question, in the Eastern Partnership, and maybe to, you know, to partnership in a broader sense. Because this is where we are being tested as a geopolitical actor. Now, when I see the numbers of how much equipment is being provided to Ukraine by United States, how much financial assistance is being provided by United States, unfortunately, I have to say, well, fortunately and unfortunately, I have to say that this is still, the security provider is still the United States. It's a transatlantic partner that is still here to provide the security. If we want to be taken seriously when we talk about the security architecture of the European continent that is provided by the European Union or by ourselves, and we need to step up when it comes to Ukraine, and also I would say politically in the broader region. That was partly covered by me and partly covered by other colleagues here in the panel.
Thank you very much. Following on that, one region that is particularly vulnerable in the neighborhood is Western Balkans. It's vulnerable to Russian influence, to Chinese influence. It still does have the European perspective, but do you think that we could do something more, Minister Alvor?
Definitely, it's a region that is very vulnerable. It's vulnerable because Russia has all ties in that region, and they know how to pull the string, and it can be vulnerable if they get frustrated. I'm very happy to see that Albania, Northern Macedonia are advancing in their relation with us. But it's the whole region that we must tackle. And we must be very clear with them about the future that is waiting for them within our European family. We must help them also in their efforts. And we must, first of all, acknowledge all the efforts that they are doing, and we must help them, because all the effort they are doing is to join our family, to share our values, to be up to the standards that we want to meet, and therefore they are moving away from that other influence that deny the European model. So definitely the path that has been started with Northern Macedonia and Albania very recently must not be stopped, and we must keep up on that pace.
Thank you very much. Moving a little bit further to Moldova, which is your neighbor, and in general to those countries that were offered a candidate status, of course Ukraine as well. Do you think that we are acting quickly enough, that it is a real perspective for membership that is helping them, or are they being just put in a waiting room with a nice name? And what can we do more in this context?
Well, I definitely hope that this is not a waiting room, because I think these countries do deserve this candidate status and European perspective. Today we met the foreign ministers of Ukraine, of the Republic of Moldova and of Georgia all together, and the atmosphere was great because it was the first meeting after the historic decision of the European Council in June. And the word which was on everybody's lips, in fact there were two words, one was reform and the other one was support for reform. And I think this is what we need to do right now. We have to support these countries in order to fulfill those benchmarks which were included in the 17th of June opinion of the Commission, which recommended the granting of candidate status. For Moldova itself, it is very important since this objective gives a goal, and this is valid for Ukraine as well, gives a goal to the country. The country has already a very committed leadership, a president, a government, and a parliament which are pro-democratic reforms, which are willing to perform in that direction, to perform the reform of the justice system, of the public administration, of the economy, and the conditions for investors, and so on. And I think this goal provides also the possibility for having a rhythm for reforms. And what we need to do is to help. Of course, Moldova is very vulnerable because it is the most exposed neighbor of Ukraine to the impact of the crisis in Ukraine. It has multiple crises which are going on at the same time. There is a crisis of energy, and we have discussed today about the challenges heavy dependence from Russian sources and from electricity from Transnistria, the separatist province of the Republic of Moldova. There is a crisis resulting from the effort to support the humanitarian assistance for the refugees. They have the largest number of refugees per capita among the neighbors of Ukraine. There is an economic crisis because of the effects of the war and the loss of various markets for their products, and the social assistance effort for the citizens. Basically, the economy is not going too well. And for instance, the inflation is perhaps the largest in Europe. It's almost 32% or even more now as we speak. So they need support. And that's why we have created Romania, Germany, and France, an initiative which is called the Moldova Support Platform. The first meeting of the platform took place at the beginning of April in Berlin. The second one in July, on the 15th of July in Bucharest. And the third one should take place by the end of the year in Paris. And the target of this instrument is to, on one hand, gather assistance, financial assistance, and the Moldovan government needs grants, so direct financial assistance for their economy. And we managed to gather 660 million euros in Berlin and 615 million euros in Bucharest. And we will continue. And on the other hand, to support the reform process which is needed in order for the benchmarks provided in the 17th of June opinion of the Commission to be achieved, to be fulfilled. So assistance for reforms, assistance for the financial effort of the country, all these are needed and are needed now.
Thank you very much. You picked on a very important topic, which is the economy, the economic situation in both in our countries, which is not so good, but that's not what we are supposed to talk about. But the economic situation in a wider neighborhood. And I would like to ask Minister Stewart how to strengthen economically those countries and make them closer to us in this sense.
Well, thank you. I think I touched earlier on free trade agreements with Georgia, Moldova, trying to make sure that they're incorporated into our economic systems. And we must make sure, going back to the issues around strategic autonomy, that we don't learn the wrong lessons, because we're never, even within the EU, going to be able to do everything for ourselves. So what our vision would be very much for a network of liberty around the world, with free trade, with open trading systems, avoiding in the eventuality of things like pandemics and other global crises, that the knee-jerk reaction isn't to freeze, put export bans in place, because actually you exacerbate rather than improve the situation. So I think while we think deeply and accept the change that I think the invasion of Ukraine has triggered in us all, looking at China and other autocratic states around the world, what we mustn't do is end up building barriers, least of all between democratic countries, and least of all excluding the weakest countries who need to see opportunity. And not every part of the world, not every country will see that opportunity as being able to join the EU, which can be a positive force for reform in the Eastern neighbourhood. But what we've got to do is make sure that we do have a network of liberty around the world, that we recognise the autocratic threats, that we stand up for our values, and that we're inclusive in a global trading system, and that we don't move away because of our disappointment about the way certain actors have behaved within the previous global system, that we don't move to a world in which everyone sits behind the walls of their blocks.
Thank you very much. And probably the last question in our panel goes to Minister Havisto, and it concerns disinformation that is being spread by our enemies in in the countries around us. It's about us. It's about the whole international system. It's the way it works or it doesn't work. Why is this disinformation so attractive to some, and why aren't we more active in countering it?
Thank you, Veronica. This is an excellent question, and of course, before going to all those who from outside are influencing to us, we just have to refer to our own COVID-19 debates, for example, in our own country, with all that amount of disinformation and following the US debates on these issues and others, I think we really should get concerned. I at least had always believed that people are more educated, have more schools, good quality education, have through the computers access to all kinds of information, and we see how attractive the nonsense is even in the computer world and in the internet and so forth. And I think that's a real tragedy, and it's a real question. How do we influence, and how, for example, young people learn to choose the right information channels and reliable information channels? And that's of course a big question. But then, of course, we are influenced systematically by Russian information, Chinese information, other information sources. And I think we were dreaming about this global internet network, and now what we see is actually localized internet with their own rules in China, internet with own rules in Russia, and so forth. So we are living in some kind of interesting moment of anti-globalization, actually, that we have to get together between the democratic countries and those forces who want to defend the free media and so forth. And maybe looking this in the perspective of Ukraine and the Russian attack against Ukraine, I think it's so important that we support currently also the free media that is working with the Russian language, those Russian journalists who probably cannot work anymore in their own country, but hopefully can work in the European Union. In Finland, we have, for example, had a very good experience that we have our national broadcasting companies sending news already for many years in Russian language because of the Russian minority living in Finland. But actually, we have noticed that also the Russian media is sometimes, time to time, picking the Finnish source in Russian language. Some journalists in St. Petersburg have been saying that they cannot publish themselves something, but when they can pick a Finnish news, they can refer to those channels. And I think that kind of work we really have to do, and we have to do very systematically to get our information through.
Thank you very much. This is an excellent end, excellent last take to the discussion, which I would like to summarize very quickly. It's difficult to summarize everything that was said, but I think there was not much disagreement in what the distinguished panelists said. I think first point is that we should engage with countries in our wider neighborhood. We should fight the disinformation that is there. We should offer them perspective and for our own counter-narrative. Second point that came out of the discussion is that we should strengthen our own security, both through strengthening EU-NATO ties and through strengthening the European defenses. This is a point without which we cannot continue. And the third point was to offer economic stability and security to those countries around us. I hope we will be able to do all 3 points, and for next year when we meet, we won't need to discuss whether to defeat Russia or not, because Russia will be defeated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Always good. See you again. Thank you.
taking off, yeah.
Zapněte mi, už jsem slyšet. Okay, so please don't leave the room. We will start another panel right away, and I will invite the panelists from the panel dedicated to the reconstruction to take the seats and join me at the podium. Please. Mr. Minister, once again. Yeah.
Where do you? Okay.
So,
you have it wrong. See, too late here. And
again. Ivana.
Okay, good evening. From another panel, my name is Jaroslav Kurfürst. I'm Deputy Minister for Europe in the Czech Foreign Ministry, and I'm responsible for European affairs. I'll be moderating the panel, which will be dedicated to another crucial issue around Ukraine and Russian aggression, and this is the panel on reconstruction. Reconstruction is a necessity for Ukraine. This is also, however it can sound strangely, it is an opportunity for Ukraine. And reconstruction is a strong signal to Ukrainians. It's a strong signal of the unity of the international community. It's also a strong signal to aggressor. These and many other issues we will be discussing here with a really prominent colleagues and personalities. Many of them are key actors which are shaping the response, the international or Ukrainian response to the needs of reconstruction of Ukraine. So I'm so pleased that at the panel I can introduce the President of the European Investment Bank, Mr. Werner Hoyer, who is also the German economist and politician. I'm so pleased that I can I'll continue with the lady, that I can introduce also Ivana Klimpuš-Cinsadze, who is the chairman of the Committee on the European Integration of Verkhovna Rada, but also the former Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine for the European and Euro-Atlantic integration. I'll introduce Mr. Gordan Grlić-Radman, who is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Croatia, minister of a country which made it from the post-war reconstruction through reforms to the membership in the European Union. That's a really successful story with plenty of experience. And last but not least, my good colleague Maciej Popovsky, who is acting Director General of DG NEAR and a person who really needs and understands, who really understands what is being cooked in the kitchen of the European Union. So welcome all here. We have the last guest here, which is Lena Košárny, and Lena is coming. So Lena is being prepared, and she will have a special entrée.
Thank you.
And Lena is a founding partner and CEO of the Horizon Capital, which is one of the most successful Ukrainian investment fund. Lena is Canadian and a person with, of course, Ukrainian roots, but also a great and extensive knowledge of Ukrainian economy. So on the issues of private sector, which are so important, Lena will be responding or contributing to our debate. I will right away ask the question to President of the European Investment Bank, Werner Hoyer. Mr. President, European Investment Bank has been in Ukraine from 2007. You have done many things in Ukraine, so I would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit, in short, what you have done in Ukraine so far. I would like to, in a second request, I would like to elaborate you about the present activities of the European Investment Bank for a little bit longer, because after 24th of February, European Investment Bank stepped up the activities in Ukraine. And lastly, I would like to ask you to elaborate about the future plans of the European Investment Bank. And here, of course, if you can elaborate in a sort of quite important way, because that's the main issue of the day, what will happen in the future. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to fill the next 2 hours of this conference with my responses. No, first of all, thank you very much to the Presidency of the Council of the European Union for convening this conference and for the content. And I would say, after what I've heard this afternoon, I would say, on the basis of this broad consensus that we have heard here, I'm wondering why we are not further advanced. And there are so many things where we are not where we should be. I go back to Warsaw, which was a very, very inspiring and hope-giving event under Swedish-Polish cooperation. Then we had Lugano, which to me was a huge disappointment because the Europeans did not really put flesh to the bone. We need to live up to the expectations that are connected with the aspirations of the European Union. And on the basis of what I've heard here today, I think we can do that. On the other hand, I see the financial difficulties. All public money in budgets of this world will not suffice in order to finance the reconstruction needs of Ukraine. So we need to mobilize the private sector. And the Private Sector Mobilization Institute of the European Union is the EIB, which in a couple of years will have Ukraine as its shareholders. That has an effect on the mind of our people. So we need to be active, and we need to be active now. There are some people in the boards of the bank, in the finance ministries in particular, who deal, of course, with the funds of the bank very, very responsibly and say, okay, if there is the risk that something that we rebuild now might be destroyed again by the Russians, that we better don't do it. I think this is fundamentally wrong. Because those parts of Ukraine which are still free or which have been liberated by now, they will carry most of the burden of the reconstruction of Ukraine, and they keep the economy of Ukraine running. So we need to support them now. I know mayors who have destroyed, asked their people to destroy their bridges themselves because they didn't want the Russian tanks to come over that bridge. And these bridges in liberated areas now need to be rebuilt. We have financed since 2007, as you say, hospitals, many in Ukraine, which have been destroyed by the war, are in liberated zones now. These hospitals need to be operational right now. So we cannot wait until the big bang, I mean the big bang in the positive sense, the big peace will be established. We need to be active now, because that will also contribute to the speed with which Ukraine, after a success of the Ukrainian forces, will be fully rebuilt. So let's get active now. I think we need a couple of more instruments, because the budget of the European Union is also not endless. The colleagues are trying to carve out of it as much as possible, but we need the private sector. We have had an instrument within the European Union in the last couple of years, an invention which I put on the table 2 years ago. That was the European Guarantee Fund. Something similar could be replicated here. If we, in the context of the overall proposal that Mrs. von der Leyen will probably make in the context of the G7 event in October, if we, in this context, also carve out an investment facility as in form of a guarantee fund, let's say of 20 billion euros supported by the member states with guarantees, we can make an investment volume out of 100 billion euros out of it within months. And at least we can get the decisions and the plans there. And then we can act much more quickly than we wait for the entire budgetary procedures that take us, that cost us years in the European Union in order to get where we want to produce an effect.
Thank you so much. I would turn to Ivana now, and I will start the question with my modest experience. I visited 3 weeks ago Kiev and part of Ukraine, and I was really impressed by the resilience of the villages and towns and the country. At the places where yesterday there were Russian troops which were pushing towards Kiev, you have markets, you have traffic jams, you have the really real life, and you have the reconstruction already taking place. So this is a really very, very strong story that Ukraine is ready for the reconstruction and it is ready to take it. Now, I was also impressed by the way how it is being handled on the administrative level. We were shown some 2,000 pages long document and the map. Every single object which was damaged is on the map, which is interactive. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can cut it, schools, private houses, etc. You can cut it region by region, etc. It's really impressive. So there is a lot of preparation in Kiev about the reconstruction. I'd like to ask you about your vision of the division of labor, about the governance, how much it would be a Kiev-driven, how much it will be the international institution-driven process or the donors process-driven, how you would see all this organized in the best way. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Yaroslav, and I actually want to thank everybody who is making an effort to travel to Ukraine these days, and not only to show solidarity with the Ukrainian people, but also see for your own eyes what is happening on the ground, take it back home, and come with another resolute decision and resolute readiness for further engagement. We really need it at this particular point, and we really need that nobody is getting tired, because we, for that matter, cannot ourselves get ourselves to get tired, and we will continue both fighting and also trying to live our lives. And that's what you are seeing, that we are trying to live our lives in those regions that have been deoccupied, that have been liberated. And I think this brutal, drastic war of Russian Federation is after liberation of the areas. And once we win, and Mr. Hoyer is really right that there is such a consensus, so we should be much more advanced. I really believe that Russia will be defeated and we will win this war, this existential war for us. So after that, we have a unique, I think, chance to not only build back better, but build a totally new type of economy, totally new type of a country with, which would leapfrog to a post-industrial world, which does not have to rebuild the Soviet industrial plants that we used to have and modernize them. So all these opportunities, I hope, are ahead of us. But definitely there are a couple of layers to that reconstruction. And first and foremost, there is a layer of early recovery. That's what you are seeing. And I think that this early recovery has to be basically unconditional, and we have to focus on and get engaged on helping people to build back their housing, build back the most critical infrastructure, take care of the mines. I think demining did not really, the word was not really pronounced here, but Ukraine today is the most polluted country in the world with the mines, and that is going to be a big task for any rebuilding, any reconstruction as such. And make sure that we are preparing for a bigger reconstruction. That definitely has to have solid strategy, has to have priorities, has to have a clear common approach to methodology of counting the losses, and has to have a common and clear, transparent mechanism of using the money that will be contributed, invested, donated, and so on. And here, I think we are we have to ensure that this reconstruction is happening only together with the transformation of the country. And I think candidacy status of Ukraine, with the prospect of becoming the EU member, gives us that opportunity. I really believe that it cannot be reconstruction separately, transformation separately, EU integration on one track and then reconstruction on the other track. Only intertwining these processes, and only through engagement of all the stakeholders, from the central government to local governments, which are at this moment really waiting for opportunities to come through. And I would very much encourage to have this horizontal ties also with the regional authorities at this particular moment, because they are the ones who know the exact needs of the people right there, and who can deliver very, very quickly. So through engagement and through wider dialogue with businesses, with the civil society, I think we can ensure that a new, innovative, creative Ukraine will be rebuilt and reconstructed. But again, today, probably a little bit I will dissonate with Mr. Hoyer here. I really think that even in the not occupied areas, the big reconstruction cannot be happening at this particular moment for a number of reasons. Early recovery, that is the focus at this particular moment. That's my call.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Now I will turn maybe on Maciej and look into that EU kitchen I mentioned. The European Union declared that it is ready to lead the process, I mean the big international process. We have seen Lugano, now in Prague on Monday there was Chancellor Scholz who was announcing the conference 25th of October. I think it's connected with the German presidency also in G7, but still there is a EU commitment to lead the process. There is the communication of the European Commission from 18th of May, where there is a proposal of establishing the platform, and then there is a discussion within the EU about establishing a Rebuild Ukraine facility, and so on. So we have the process on the global scale with
the donors outside the European Union. We have the internal debate. Of course, we have seen or we have heard from Ivana about the Ukrainian process, the preparation, and of course there is a short and longer term reconstruction. So maybe, Maciej, I would like to ask you to design a picture of where we are in that process and cut it to the early and longer, and what is the EU state of the debate right now?
Thank you, Jaroslav. I mean, you asked me to draw a picture. I mean, usually, when people think of the Commission, they see a big pile of money with us sitting on top of it. But this pile is no longer there, and that's why we have to be imaginative, but I'll come back to it. Indeed, you mentioned the proposal that we put forward in May, but let me clarify. The idea is we said we are ready to co-lead the process, not to impose anything on the Ukrainians. It's their country and they have to own it. Mm-hmm. So so much is clear. Mm-hmm. So we also said that we would be ready to help establish and then co-lead an international platform, again, not to impose things, but to follow the Ukrainian recovery plan that was already presented by Prime Minister Šmihal at the Lugano conference, and reach out to other donors. You know, we are not naive to believe that any other big donor would just give us their money to manage. That doesn't work like that. I mean, the Americans would do the things their way, and then there's World Bank and the other bilateral donors, but I think we need a bit of clarity who does what. It's a huge undertaking that will take years. Yeah. So if the Ukrainian government is comfortable with that, we could do it together. We can certainly help. We can provide a lot of technical assistance. And follow their own assessment. They are quite far advanced. Also, the World Bank has now wrapped up their own preliminary needs assessment, which is going to be launched and presented in Brussels at the end of next week, normally. So we have the parameters. Of course, I very much agree with the comments made so far. We cannot do everything at the same time, but we don't have much time. We cannot wait. And we have to be imaginative when it comes to the policy instruments. As I said, we have no cash. I mean, we had quite a lot, but we already spent it. The cash that we provided the Ukrainian government with was mainly meant to keep the government afloat, but also to finance a little bit of early recovery. For instance, what was pledged at the Warsaw event, 500 million. This will go into the early recovery, in particular in the regions less affected by war. And we want to link up with the mayors, and that's going to work. But of course, it's just a trickle. We need much more than that. The figure that the Ukrainians use themselves, and the World Bank is more or less on the same line, is $750 billion euros in damages. So that's the order of magnitude. And here comes the creativity. We need to see what we can do, indeed, with guarantees for investors and development banks, with insurance for companies that would be willing to engage. And we have to assume that it's not a risk-free operation. But again, we are talking about what we are going to provide. There will be some grants, there will be loans, but with long maturity. We are not talking about something that would add to the pressure on the Ukrainian government today. So we have to generate this funding, but also put in place assurances for our own taxpayers. I mean, we are talking about quite a lot of public funding that will be needed in the country, and indeed, this logic of building back better comes in very handy. And I very much agree with the assumption that was also spelled out in our policy paper in the communication in May, that we would see the reconstruction process going hand in hand with the integration. Now we are one step further ahead, so the candidate status to Ukraine sort of set the road, set the path to Europe. It's also a chance. And what we really would like to offer is to follow the same logic that we followed ourselves in the post-COVID recovery in Europe. So building back better, looking at similar types of instruments and that we put within this framework of Next Generation EU, and President von der Leyen was very clear about it. Now it has to happen, and we are still in the midst of the discussion. And at the same time, of course, we have to continue providing current assistance, which the next batch coming up is the microfinancial assistance, which is long-term loans, very attractive conditions. And it was again announced in May. We disbursed 1 billion of up to 9 that were announced in August, and we are working on the rest. So we need to step up, I know. And then we heard it in Lugano loud and clear. Everybody expects the Europeans to step up to the plate. We've already provided Ukraine with it's around 10 billion in grants and loans and military assistance and in-kind assistance, but we know it's not enough. That's why we have to be quick and creative at the same time.
Super. I heard the same echo from all three speakers about the private sector's involvement, and that's maybe a good question to Lena. Lena, I would like to ask you to contribute to the debate with your ideas about how the framework of international institutions, but also on the Ukrainian side, should be set up to attract investors. Of course, now investors in the places where it is possible that there is no immediate danger or the danger is not that high. Maybe some sectors are in focus, but in the longer run, it will be about creating the system which is able to attract investors. So what you would advise as to create from Ukrainian government, but also from the international community who will speak about the guarantees and loans, etc. So this is all for what does it mean for private investors?
Okay, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to represent the private sector. I feel like it's a really huge honor. As was mentioned, I'm Canadian. I've spent 30 years in Ukraine, and over those years, my focus has been backing visionary entrepreneurs, SMEs, with growth capital so that they can expand their businesses in Ukraine and Moldova. So basically, we have brought in, leveraged through the 1 billion that we've raised in international financial institution and private sector monies from those who have a capital base of almost 600 billion. They've backed us with 1 billion, and we've leveraged and brought in total loans and equity of 2.3 to back companies that have created over 70,000 jobs. So it's something that we're very proud of. We're very proud of that partnership that exists between governments, international financial institutions, private sector, et cetera. And I guess a very short answer to your question is don't create anything. Leverage what exists today. And that's we don't have time to create things because Ukrainian business and SMEs and private sector is operating. It's never stopped. The communication, the mobile, the internet, the banking, all of that works better in Ukraine today than when I drive from Warsaw to Bratislava to Vienna to throughout Europe. So business has never stopped. Business is first and foremost from February 24th ensure the safety, security of its people. That's number one. Then what business did is ensure that their business could continue. And then third is made sure that they did everything possible to help their community. So it's really encouraging for me, both we see across the board all of our portfolio companies, but we also see, I'm chair of American Chamber of Commerce, those who put in 50 billion in the country, you see the extent to which they've set up humanitarian hubs, are doing extensive work in their communities and producing huge results. So I just want to throw out a few stats. I think I'm the private sector rep, so I'll throw out some stats that folks may not know about. I mean, everybody knows the headline numbers. Everybody knows that we went into this year at a height, 30 billion in reserves, 200 billion in nominal GDP, the highest in Ukraine's history. Fantastic year that we thought we would have 3 to 4% growth. And now everyone's talking about, will it be 30% GDP loss or 40% or 50%? It depends if the ports are unblocked, to what extent. They're already starting to be unblocked. Grains are moving, oils are moving, but are metals going to move? Are other commodities going to move, et cetera? So that's the headline numbers. But what not everybody understands is that 97% of businesses remain operational in July, up from 92%. That's huge. The central bank reserves, folks know, is 22 billion, but the national currency, given the balance of payments that have come in, the foreign aid plus the remittances plus exports that have started, and also the IT sector, which is contributing immensely in terms of exports and hard currency inflows into the country, that the currency is only down about 25%. Other currencies in the region are 20 to 15%, so a 25% is actually quite manageable. But what we like to do is also look at other indicators. Card payments are up 20% year on year. Shopping mall attendance, 90%. Restaurant revenues, 80%. Railway ticket sales, 80% of pre-war levels. So what I also want to reiterate what Ivana said, which is basically, in Ukraine, folks are living their lives, going to work, going to restaurants, doing what they should do every day to make their country continue and to ensure that their economy runs. And I think our role as an international community is to help Ukraine help itself. Ukraine wants to run. Ukraine was fantastic at Lugano. Everybody, I had the good fortune of speaking and moderating at Lugano. Everyone was amazed at how well Ukraine did. 2,500 experts weighed in. The recovery plan that was presented was thorough, was an excellent start. Now it's up to everyone else to, it's like us in the private sector, when an entrepreneur gives you a business model and they have everything laid out. Now it's up to us to assess, to coordinate, to work together with them to help them realize that. So, last point that I want to make, I know there's a lot that we want to cover, is how critical it is for the private sector that you have that public-private partnership. I mean, we're fortunate, we've always had that. We have EBRD backing us, IFC, 5 governments, US, Dutch, Danish government, French, German government through DG. And them coming in to our funds enables us to go out and attract private sector money and then put all of that to work in the region. That's essential. It's essential that those kinds of institutions, that they take that step forward. I'm proud that they are taking that step forward. And that will enable the private sector to follow them. So that's really important. Dr. Hoyer, I completely agree with absolutely everything that you've said. We cannot wait. It's really important. I was sitting with EIB in Mariupol 2019, and EIB was doing the first things in Mariupol. It was incredible. We cannot wait. And my only request to our European colleagues, European Investment Fund, got to get working in Ukraine. There's a lot of financial intermediaries who know what they're doing on the ground, and it's not enough to do the things that we used to do, which is like, we want to do something good for the SME, so let's give the money to bank and they're supposed to onward lend. No, we have to go further. We have to look at those folks who are on the ground and give them the tools so that they can disperse as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Very good. Lena, these were really very hopeful remarks from you, and I have to agree with you on one thing, incredible resilience. Yeah. In my previous job, I was the special envoy for the Eastern Partnership, preparing the Czech presidency, and I said, resilience will be a big topic. And we will create events for the Eastern Partnership countries about how to become more resilient. So now we were reshaping the events, and we will invite Ukrainians not as the discussant about how to, but as basically teachers. Because the cities and towns and regions, they were having such experience that no one of us went through. But there are other countries who have some experience and had some experience, and I would turn to Mr. Minister here. Your country is a really extraordinary, successful example when after the war, from the ashes, there was a rebuilding, reconstruction, there was also transformation of the system, going through the European integration process and joining the European Union. But I would like to ask you about maybe lessons learned, if you have something for us to share, successes, but maybe also something, if there is something which did not work, where we can learn from you. So the floor is yours on that.
Thank you very much, and first of all, congratulations on the excellent organization and for the kind hospitality. And I know that this forum is held happening just after the Gimnich and informal meeting with the foreign ministers. I know how is it important for the foreign policy and your stuff, and like you do it, and you did it already, and we had the same experience and that in 2020. But of course, we didn't know that, so we will face. Although our slogan was challenging the Europe in a challenging world, but the last Gimnich, the first Gimnich and last actually in 2020, we organized in physical form, and then so there actually we faced the COVID-19. However, you know that. Yes, you mentioned success. Of course, thank you very much. So I understand that. If you understand you correctly, that so you think that Croatia is a success story. Thank you very much, and we do feel it so just to be a success story, because who knew that Croatia will in these 30 years will be a member of EU, member of NATO, and we applied for a Schengen membership, and as introducing of Euro as of 1st January next year, and then so the last thing it is the membership in the OECD. Actually, there are a lot of similarities on one hand with Ukraine, and of course differences on the other hand. So first of all, the similarities that Ukraine, like Croatia, was attacked. And so Croatia have gone through armed conflict, or just was the aggression, Great Serbian aggression on our territory happened in the very beginning of 90s, and actually we have unique experience in a post-conflict recovery, and in particular peaceful reintegration. What we actually with Ukraine for the beginning shared successfully. Our Prime Minister was among the first European politicians to visit Ukraine after annexion of Crimea in 2016 as a member of European Parliament and a special reporter, and he showed that so how he at that time, because of very rare politicians visited to Ukraine, but he was very, very brave. And later on, we showed our solidarity. We are a small country, however, we had this the same experience. And Croatia, first of all, liberated 1/3 of territory in a operation and action, military police action, but later on, in 90, the rest of the eastern Slavonia, eastern part of Croatia in a peaceful reintegration. And that is something that we can offer Ukraine, and we offered. First of all, in demining. It's very important, and we have this, of course, this experience. Just these activities actually need to sustain essential governance structures for emergency response management, of course, to deliver with vital public services and to protect livelihoods. But you know, the position of Croatia was that Croatia was a part of former Yugoslavia, and it was the first conflict after the Second World War, and European community, or later on European Union, was not prepared for such a conflict. Now, having in mind that the European Union is composition of 27 countries, NATO 30, and plus Sweden and Finland. So we are more organized, we are more prepared, we are more experienced. At that time, the international community perceived and considered Croatia or conflict in former Yugoslavia as a civil war. And no one took care on that issue. But however, we had the presence of United Nations peacekeepers, and that international community recognized the sovereignty of independence of Croatia and Slovenia. So we started to grow our foreign policy goals to be achieved as soon as possible. Our experience. So first we became the receiver, and later on we are just in a country that is just provider. We are providing assistance as help. And when just as a new, relatively new donor, to a large extent we rely on cooperation with the international organization and others donors, and we have really very good experience, and so very good communication. Also, of course, experience of international organization on the procurement and monitoring and evaluation is highly valuable and reliable. In case of Ukraine, so I have to mention that multi-stakeholders are already underway, most importantly in agreement also with Ukrainian government according to their needs. I can just to inform you that where we had a cooperation with the international organization. First of all, they are United Nations organization. They are really most reliable. It is building a health center in Afghanistan 2008 together with IOM and USAID. And the second, building a school in Albania after the earthquake in 2019 with the UNDP. Although we had two devastating earthquakes, but having in mind that so we are a member of the European Union, we cannot just apply for a special conference of donors, but there is the Fund of Solidarity, which is actually a new instrument, and so we profited from this fund. So from mistakes and so on, actually I don't remember, I only remember a success. I think it's the most important, and when it comes to Ukraine, really who more than Croatia understand, and who more than Croatia is willing to support Ukraine, and who more than Croatia is willing that aggressor should withdraw its troops and tanks, and we need again international, we are on the right side of history, democracy, and against autocrats, authoritarian regimes, and we are of course in favor of international law and of international order, and we have to keep together. It is very important that this aggression also show that how we are weak or how we are strong, and we have to be strong and to strengthen our communication, to strengthen our unity, and to show that European Union has a leverage, has the instrument to act, and of course to show its strength also in Ukraine, although it is not easy. You know, it's not easy to be involved. You know, we want to avoid from political instability, escalation, and so on. And we have to work together to expel actually the aggressor. It is important, like we did 32 years ago with Milosevic regime in former Yugoslavia.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Minister. Well, I have dozens of questions for the participants still I would like to cover, but just before us the time is ticking and we are coming to the close. And I was asked not only to wrap up and sum up this panel, but also maybe the big chunk of today with all the messages we received. So I'll try to, in short, in my 1 minute 45 seconds, to say that we all here agreed on the urgency of action which immediately should be deployed to Ukraine in this immediate recovery. We heard from the president of the European Investment Bank that something like European Guarantee Fund could be promoted. That was the agreement of all the participants, but the president mentioned it very strongly about the private sector involvement and, of course, all the leveraging and insurances and so on, guarantees. Demining was mentioned very strongly, which is our endeavor. Then, of course, the preparation for the bigger reconstruction and the modernization into the future, a sort of leap into a really next technological era with 5Gs and so on. Horizontal ties, cities, regions, that was so forcefully promoted. Co-leadership of all the, of course, co-leadership of the institutions and donors, but also the Ukrainian government. That was a strong point I heard. Creativity was a word of many. Do not create anything, just leverage what exists and leave the economy and companies and private sector do the job. That was a voice of hope from the private sector and private-public partnership. And in general, I felt the hope. I felt the determination and hope, and that's I think, a good conclusion for this panel. I will still try to make 2 points from what I personally took from all the day. End of passivity. That was a big headline, which Prime Minister Fiala mentioned in his speech and was repeated by Polish Minister Rau. End of passivity for the EU, maybe a new era for the EU in engaging in the world, but especially in Ukraine. And the second message, it is not a territorial war only. It is a territorial war, but it is having a continental and even global impact. And we have to address also the third countries, which are not Europeans. We have to go and explain that the rule of law on the international scale, the rule-based international order is in question, and we have to defend it. So that's my personal wrap-up. Thank you for the attention. Have a nice evening.
Well done.
Enjoy the rest of the forum.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Reconstruction with transformation.
Ladies and gentlemen, just one short